Welcome to Summit Session number 18. My name is Danielle, and I'm the Marketing Director at Adventure Nannies. We are so happy to have you here with us. The views expressed today are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent the views of Adventure Nannies, but today we'll be talking about decolonizing education and creating the future our kids need, something I am personally really passionate about. I am thrilled to share a bit more about our extraordinary presenter, Iman Alleyne. Iman is an author, speaker, and educator. She is the extraordinary founder and visionary of Kind Academy, a high-quality educational organization that focuses on creating learning connections that are STEM-focused, project-based, and student-centered nationwide. She recently published her second book, Black History from a Decolonized Perspective Journal. She also launched Kind Homeschool Kits, an educational subscription box that keeps students at Kind Academy engaged, learning, and having fun while making prep work easy for families. A little side note, I highly recommend checking out Kind Academy on Instagram. You can check out kindacademy.org on the internet to find out more about the work that Iman is doing, and really do check out those kits. They're incredible. The homeschool kits are really wonderful. So without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Iman.
Hi, so hello. Thank you so much for that awesome introduction. I'm like, that sounded really good. I'm like taking notes over here. I could use some of that for my own marketing. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you so much for allowing me and giving me the space so that I can talk about something that I'm super passionate about. I know we've been trying to get this going for like months now, and my life has finally calmed down. So it's like perfect timing. And I'm so excited to kind of share this with as many people as I possibly can. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. So like you said, my name is Iman. My last name is Alleyne. I am the founder of Kind Academy, like you said. We've been around for a pretty long time now, probably going on about 5 years. We always kind of had the idea of inclusion in education. I'm going to share a presentation. This is for me and for you, honestly. And if you need this afterwards, you can totally ask me for the slides if you need it. I find this to be a really great way when I'm doing presentations. So let me go ahead and so I can stay on task and not completely veer off topic all the time. So like I said, I'm Iman. I'm the founder of Visionary Kind. It's an inclusive micro school. So we do a few different things. We really started off with the idea of nature-based education was a really, really big one for us. I'm the mom of 3 boys and now 1 little girl who is 9 months old. But when I had 3 pretty much under 4 or 5 years old, I was going crazy. And I was like, what can I do to kind of make this thing, this parenthood, this mommying, this adulting easier? And getting outside was always our best way to do that. So I started taking them outside. And slowly but surely, as an educator, it just became, let's learn outside now. Let's do this activity outside. And more families started to join us. So we created this kind of learning space that included everyone, people who wanted to homeschool, preschoolers. My background in education was I actually have a master's in school counseling. So social and emotional development was super, super important for what we do. And I always noticed, especially with early childhood, what was happening was our kids would have early childhood and it was like beautiful and play-based and hands-on and things like that. And then they get to kindergarten and it was like, okay, no more of that. You're sitting still for 8 hours. And our kids were falling out of chairs and they weren't spinning and they had maybe 15 minutes of playtime if they were lucky. And I pulled my son out of school and started homeschooling him. And then just started having a lot more families come through us and help them to kind of create this really awesome project-based learning idea. So we created a curriculum surrounding that. So we have a curriculum now. It's really like a micro school / curriculum / helping families homeschool / parenting / like all these other things, but really it all kind of intersects with each other. One thing that we always did was we always had decolonized education. I'm going to explain a lot about what decolonized education is as we go through, but from the beginning, we always made sure that we were welcoming. We always made sure that we had diverse groups of families. We didn't, judge anyone, and not even just only, we welcomed, like super welcome people that were different, because we knew that made like our program like different We're so used to having programs, and this isn't to say that but we never really had like a secular program. It was very difficult to find as homeschoolers secular kind of education models, or secular homeschoolers, or whatever, secular private schools. So that was a big deal to a lot of families, feeling included in it without feeling like they had to give up a part of who they were. So we were really always big on that. And then within the past 2 or 3 years, when everything kind of exploded with George Floyd, we really knew immediately that we had to do something to make it easier for people who were looking for information on how to decolonize education and the importance of that, and kind of the step-by-step for that. So that's pretty much what we did. And we created a course and basically made it much easier for families to teach what we do, Black history, from a decolonized perspective. So that's pretty much who I am and what I do. So today, our kind of webinar or our lesson or whatever, we're going to be talking a lot about that kind of stuff and how you can kind of do it yourself. I know you're nannies, and I know that I'm assuming like early childhood education is a big thing, or probably even the elementary school age or things like that. So I try to make it as simple as I possibly can, like a step-by-step, and what we can do to make sure that we're being inclusive for our learners. Okay. I don't mind if you interrupt me and ask questions. I don't mind if you chat. I don't know if you want to say it to the end, Miss Danielle. But if you do, that's totally fine. I really don't mind. And I might even ask you for feedback and questions and things like that to keep it interactive, and also to kind of get some ideas from you all. I love learning from everyone else too. And sometimes I don't even think of things. So to get started, here we go. And if I'm ever talking too fast, let me know. I know I talk fast. Like, all right. So why do we need to learn about this, right? So it's decolonizing education. What is super important? So we're educators, right? Most of us, no matter what, we're educators. I now, when I talk about homeschooling, I always say, like, I've been homeschooling since my babies are born, right? A lot of people are like, I know I can't homeschool. I just don't have the patience. I'm like, you taught them how to walk, you taught them how to talk, you taught them how to, you're playing with kids, you're talking to them all the time. You are the environment that you're creating for them. You are an educator, no matter what age group you are teaching, right? You're an educator. So as educators, our job is always to be ahead of the game. We have to be open-minded. We have to be accepting of students of different backgrounds, religions, sexual orientation, genders, and cultures, right? We have to make sure that we're doing that. Students remember and learners remember how you make them feel, and they know. They're very, very quick to pick up on if you are not being inclusive to them, and they'll remember that feeling forever and ever. I still hear stories that kids are like traumatized from that one teacher who didn't, you know what I mean, acknowledge their background, who said something that was off the mark about who they were or their family. So I'm always trying to make sure that I'm constantly learning and growing, and we're all constantly doing that. So that's why. Our topics for the day, we're going to mostly talk about decolonizing education, and it kind of, over all of this stuff kind of interacts with each other, but I'm going to break down all three of these things: decolonizing education, diversity, and anti-racism, and kind of what all those things mean. They're big buzzwords now, and I just want to break them down and kind of let you know exactly how you can incorporate them and what they mean for us. Okay. So the decolonization of education, those are some really, really big words. I break this down with I teach like as young as 5-year-olds, like in an actual class setting, decolonization of education. So for my like 8, 9-year-olds, I kind of explain that decolonizing anything basically means that we are dismantling or getting rid of the systems that were built and that were here before. Okay, so let's give you an example, right? Education, schools were segregated up until the 50s, 60s. And some people would even like to say that schools are not segregated now, or they're now integrated. By law, they are. But there are even numbers that have come out that say that schools are even more segregated today than they were before. These systems are there's obviously an issue there. Why is it still segregated? Why are there still these issues in education? Why are brown kids and Black kids sent to the principal's office more often than white kids? Why are white kids called on more often? Why are Black kids still identified with higher special education needs than other children? Why do we not see Black children in books in the library at schools? Why do we not see Indigenous people being talked about as if they're still here? Why do we have teachers? I don't know if you guys have just recently seen this TikTok. Why do we have a teacher whooping and war hopping throughout the classroom? Like, why is this still happening? Why do I have to worry on Halloween that somebody's going to paint themselves with blackface like every single year, right? Why are we still doing this? Especially as educators, you would think that we have this. So that's a big part of decolonizing education. When I break it down in simple forms for example, if we have super early learners, my best thing is always making sure that we have a super diverse classroom. I've also taught anti-racism to little kids. And a big part of me doing that is making sure that I talk about the fact that some people are treated differently, even because of their skin color, or especially because of their skin color. So decolonizing education breaks down to just making sure that we know, just historically speaking, education and really our whole kind of like worldview has really always been based off of the colonial standard. So colonizers came over, went to places, took over, and not only just took over, they pretty much kind of erased the people from the land or forced people off their land, right? And then they enslaved people to force them to work that land, right? And those people are all still here. So we're all still dealing with kind of the repercussions of all of that history, right? So decolonizing all of that is at least talking about it, identifying it, and then making sure that we are working towards ending it, right? And that really starts with discussion and admitting that it's there. So decolonizing education basically means making sure that, especially in the education system, we're doing that, but also throughout the world. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, good. I know I talked a little bit about that. We're kind of go over it a bit more. So we basically have to keep talking about it. And that's really scary for so many people. And I get it. Like it's always a little bit nerve-wracking because you don't want to say the wrong thing. But the only way that we're going to know if we say the wrong thing is if you say it out loud and then somebody kind of corrects us about it. And this is a safe place to do that, right? Is that okay for me to do? Is this okay? You know what I mean? Like, is this kind of acceptable? Oh, thank you, Natalia. I needed that. I just got a nice comment. I appreciate that in the chat box. So that's a big part of it. Making sure that we're having these talks about it, making sure that you guys are doing the workshops, making sure that you are kind of open to learning. I mean, I'm not a pro on certain topics. I think that's really like the biggest thing. I'm not a pro on everything. Like I know a lot about this historical kind of Black history thing, but to be completely honest, I don't know a whole lot about pronouns and I'm learning so much. And I've been corrected over and over again. And every time I apologize and I say, okay, how can I be better moving forward? You know what I mean? And first you're kind of like, oh my gosh, but that is the reality of it. The only way that we can fix it is by kind of being wrong about it sometimes and being open to learning and fixing it. Okay. Conversation. So that kind of comes down to just having those conversations, having those hard conversations. A lot of my people will always say like, I have Black friends. And I'm like, okay, talk to them. Like, ask them questions if they're open to it. Google is amazing. A lot of times, like you will come across a lot of fairly good content about somebody else kind of gave directions. I was on Instagram and she gave really good directions on how follow anti-racist educators. Like follow 10 of them. Like if you don't want to do the work of asking a Black person, because that is kind of like, it's sometimes hard to constantly be telling, you know what I mean? But follow anti-racist educators on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook. There's some really great people to follow. Follow 10 of them. And you'll be surprised at how much you pick up and how much you learn without ever having a Black person have to do the work for you. But if you have a Black friend and they never said anything to you about experiencing racism, so therefore you feel like racism doesn't exist, ask 5 of your Black friends. And if you don't have 5 Black friends, then definitely follow some Black people. But that goes along with anybody of any different ethnicity that you're used to being around. Okay. A lot of my people tell me that they never had a Black teacher. They never had a Black educator. That's really a thing, right? So that's a really big part of kind of making sure that we understand the differences and how we're being affected or how people are being affected in general. Having students that also are not exposed to differing people and being able to teach them without any diversity or any background is super important, in learning from different people as well. Try to get them in front of other people, even if it's playing videos that are people that are color, doing different things and reading stories out loud to them or whatever you can do, or going to a story time, even if it's a little bit further down the block where there are brown kids or Black kids or whatever, things like that. I'll try to give some more suggestions as I think of them. but having the conversation, back to that. All right. Diversity, what exactly does it mean? So diversity can mean a whole lot of different things, but for the sake of this training, we're basically going to mean understanding that each student brings unique ideas, experiences, and strengths with them, right? So a lot of times we, as educators, we may hear things like, that's a low performing school, or they're in a low performing school, or we don't want to, you know what I mean? And those are kind of conversations that, why are we saying that that's a low performing school? Because they took a standardized test that talked about skiing, and that's just not something that they necessarily do in this neighborhood. Like, how can we make sure that we are having these conversations and speaking about things as well? So making sure that we are having diversity in our conversations is super important. Okay. How are our learners and their families diverse? So how are you kind of interacting with different people? Race, right, is one way. Ethnicity, culturally, they're different. Sexual orientation. Kids, I mean, like 5-year-olds. I've had 5-year-olds. Like, my pronoun is, you know what I mean? Like this. And I'm like, okay, like we need to know this stuff. Kids that are older now are saying like they knew from a very early age that they were bisexual or that they were gay. What does it mean if I'm always with my kids, I'm always talking about like what commentary is okay. I think today we saw something, and I'm gonna kind of embarrass myself here, but be completely honest. My son said something like he saw a guy with nails on, with fingernails, and he was like, "That's gay, that's gay, that's gay." And he's young, 7, 8 years old. That doesn't make it okay. But immediately I was like, where did you hear that? Number one, like, where did you hear that this is something that we say just because we see somebody? Do you even know what that means? Not in a bad way. I'm not like, punishing or anything like that. I'm really just curious at first. I want to know how you know about this. What do you know about it? Just so I can correct that mindset pretty quickly. That's, you know what I mean? Like, that's not the way that we would never go up to somebody and say that they're fat. And even though it's an identity, we would never say it like that, right? Socially. So what do we say instead? And let me let you know what that means, right? Being gay means when two people that are the same sex love each other, right? Generally. Okay, so that means a man that loves a man or wants to be married to another man, or a woman that wants to be married. And there's really nothing wrong with that. So to point out that's gay just because they have on fingernails, you see why that's not okay. That's a learning lesson, right? It's a learning opportunity. So we're always I don't have any problem with seeing somebody that's walking, kissing, holding hands of the same gender or identifies the same gender. That to me does not matter. And I love my kids to be exposed to that, because that's the real world. And we can do that as nannies, as educators. My classroom is an inclusive classroom. I tell my people that all the time. That's our job, really. Like, if we don't do that now, like, it's constantly, some people say, oh, we should wait until they're older, but kids know. And if you've been in education, that kids know, right? Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so necessary. Gender, same thing. Socioeconomic status, right? So we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. Ability is another way that our children and our learners are diverse. Neurodiversity is something that we are always kind of being aware of. And I talk to my kids all the time about, like, he thinks differently than you. His brain works, or their brain works differently than your brain may work, and that's okay. You know what I mean? And this is how we make sure that we are making sure that it's easier or more accommodating for that learner, right? But then I talk about like all the positives, like all the superpowers that they have as well. Religious beliefs, of course, we talk about like religious beliefs and political beliefs. So even political beliefs we talk about, as long as that political belief is not affecting or damaging or harming somebody's livelihood or somebody's life, or it doesn't negate somebody's experiences. We're cool with the people with different political beliefs as well, right? All right, so those are ways that our families are diverse. Understanding some lingo that you may have seen, right? So microaggression. A lot of times, this is kind of what most people experience now. We're not really in a time, and this is why people like believe like it doesn't exist. Oh, there's no way there's racism. Nobody called anyone the N-word around here. Like, why? Like, why do you think that there's I hear all the time, like, there's no racism, but we experience microaggressions. We get, hey, let me touch your hair, or hey, let me touch your child's hair. Oh my gosh, such beautiful eyes. My son has hazel eyes. He's Black. But I have my 3 other children that are there with normal colored eyes, and somebody's like, oh my God, look at his eyes. And I get, like, that's cool, that's a compliment, but it's also based off of the standard that has been put there because of colonization for a long time, right? Hazel eyes are kind of like the, you know, and I know it's not a negative or unintentional, but that's a microaggression for us. And I'm always like correcting, like they all have beautiful eyes. Like I know we all have beautiful brown eyes, like, and so that my other children don't feel like something's wrong with them as well. Those are the little things that kind of sneak up on us and we don't realize it. Subtly, unconsciously, or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group. Culturally responsive teaching recognizes the importance of including students' cultural reference in all aspects of learning, enriching classroom. So cultural responsive teaching, super, super important. I think that kind of ties in with decolonizing education as well. That all kind of ties in with making sure that we're being anti-racist as well. And we'll keep talking about that. But a lot of you, I think a lot of us kind of automatically have been doing this culturally responsive teaching, or at least we try to, having dolls of different colors in your classroom or in the learner's environment, having Black babies, having babies with brown hair and not just blonde hair, blue eyes. That's all culturally responsive, right? Yep, we get that all the time, man. I get that all the time. Let me see. I hope I'm saying your name right. I think it's Natalia, but you can totally correct me. Feel free. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. That's an awesome way to spell it. Thank you. So lighter is better. And I think that that's like a typical, like I get that a lot. And it's kind of interesting that we even get that, because growing up, my mom is German Jamaican. She is very light skinned. She grew up in Jamaica and she actually was teased for her lighter skin complexion, which is like, but we have colorism among our own cultures as well. And it goes both ways sometimes, but generally it's based off of European standards. But yeah, definitely. White privilege. So white privilege is like, oh my gosh, like I'm not privileged. I get this all the time too. I'm not privileged. Like I'm poor, I'm broke. We didn't have any money growing up. We didn't have this. Like I had to fight my way to get to everything. And white privilege is not that you don't have anything or that you had to fight for what you got. White privilege is that you never were kind of shut down because of your skin color. And that's something that we all kind of have to recognize. Like this is the standard. I talk about this all the time as well. Resumes. You could send a resume with a Black sounding name, with higher qualifications, higher experience, higher kind of everything, and then a white sounding name. And I'm sure that it goes the same way with more Latin sounding names, or Latino or Latinx or Latina. I know that that's just what it is, right? So a Jessica versus a Jamal, or a Jessica versus an Iman. And my name being Iman, like I kind of get a double whammy because my name is actually Arabic. So I know like sometimes I get that people automatically will look at that name and automatically assume, oh wait, like, so that's an issue. And it's statistically like proven and has happened over and over and over again. Rental applications. Oh my gosh. I'm sure, right? Oh my gosh. I tell people that all the time. White privilege. I cannot move to certain places in the country. Like we talk about this all the time. My husband, we would love to live in a lower cost of living area, but those traditionally have been red, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but not only just red, but sundown towns. And a lot of people don't know what a sundown town is. A sundown town is literally like 60 years ago, 70 years ago, if I walked through that town after the sun went down, I could be shot on sight. And it happened regularly. 80 years ago, 100 years ago. And just because that time is like kind of over, like there's signs that are still up in certain towns. There are KKK rallies that are still managed. There are people in our government that are still people a part of the KKK. So I'm super passionate about like talking about that. I know this is like, but this is just to kind of open our eyes to like all of the things that we do have to kind of think about. I know we have to think about a bunch like as women in general, a lot of times, like carry your keys and whatever. And it's like, well, we need to really start teaching men like to not put things in people's drinks and not to harass, right? But we also need to understand that these are all kind of ideas that have been perpetuated for such a long time in these kind of communities and in these southern states that have historically kind of wanted the Civil War to never end, and Confederate flags are still waving. I can't move there. Like me and my family can't move there. My children cannot move to places in Florida that we live in. Like I can never, I worry literally like my child might go missing in this place because of his skin color, because his parents or his grandparents were so strongly and still tell that to their kids. So that's a part of the white privilege that we have to discuss and have to at least admit that it's there for us to be able to break down the systems that are there. But first we need to recognize it. Allyship. So basically this is the state or condition of being an ally, right? So what is being an ally? This means being basically anti-racist, right? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Danielle. So I don't know if you wanted that to be kept private. I did get it as a direct message, but if you're okay with me reading it out loud, I'll totally read it out loud. If not, that's fine with me as well. Oh, thank you. So Danielle said, my husband applied for many jobs in apartments with his real name and did not get callbacks. He changed his name to the translated version Matthew, and then he got all the callbacks. So that changes a lot. My husband is a Jamal, and I'm like, we just immediately is like, oh man. And that's not to say every single person that's Black is a Jamal, but we know historically that is a more Black name. So that is always a thought. Selling our house, buying a house. We just recently bought a house, selling our house. Take down everything. Don't sell your house with any pictures of you being Black, right? We know that could be an issue. So we did, so that we can get it appraised at a higher value, because we know historically speaking, Black houses, people who are Black and own houses, their houses sell for less or appraised for less. So those are all kind of things. So now we need to kind of talk about anti-racism. So what is that, right? This is kind of like this new thing. It's like anti-racist. Kendi has kind of made it a really big name. That is a big part of what we do as decolonizing education is and I always promote anti-racism. So I'll kind of get to it. So how to start fixing it, include content, just to kind of summarize what we were just talking about, include content from diverse authors, videos, and stories. So that's one thing that you can do as nannies and as educators immediately. Use Montessori style teaching. So this is really kind of interesting. I don't know how much background. I know I've read that Montessori was kind of like for the kids that were like, she worked with a lot of children who had lower socioeconomic statuses, and also kids who were disabled as well. So now that Montessori is like this big buzzword and super, super, super expensive, it's really interesting to me how a lot of kids are being left out. But that's neither here nor there. The philosophy of Montessori in itself is meant to be a very inclusive one. Global learning. They always kind of talked about making sure that we have pictures and dolls and materials from different cultures, and always learning about different cultures and things of that nature. So yeah, I can send them for sure. I'm happy to send them to you, Danielle. Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to send them. It's not the most organized, but it's thank you. So Montessori style teaching, I really love the idea. Montessori, Reggio, anything that's like, hey, learn at your own pace and in your own way, and show me how you do it. Montessori can be a little bit more structured, but I don't even think that that's like the natural way that Montessori really intended. But for example, like Reggio Emilia, I'm not sure how many people here know Reggio. So Reggio is like my whole program is Reggio, and I really have made it specifically Reggio because we really find it important to allow students and learners to learn at their own pace and show their kind of what they've learned in their own way. So we don't really do many like regular standardized assessments. We do a lot of project-based learning activities. And I say to my students, for example, when I create kind of activities for them, I'm always like, for my older kids, show me, and you have a choice between kind of like 3 different projects to show me what you learned today. You can either do something auditory, which is like, you can like give me a speech of you, or create a podcast of what you learned today, right? Or you can give me like a video, like if you want to perform it, give me a TikTok, make a video, I don't care, like that's fine. You could write an essay if you just want to do it an old school way, make me a collage if you want to, you know what I mean? Like write a poem, like I don't care how you show me that you learned this content, like just show me that you learned the content. And that's incredibly inclusive, and that's incredibly beneficial for students of all types, like not just my students I think that that's big on decolonizing education as well. So another thing, there's a really good meme floating around right now And it talks about, I think, Parenting Decolonized. Oh, I think Parenting Decolonized just recently posted it. And if I find it, then I'll link it. But it's basically this doctor who's talking about how we really don't know much about education in general. Like most people, the education system of today is really based off of colonial standards. Like most cultures homeschool their children, or they kind of continue on with them. And the way the education was kind of set up was really for factory workers and to see who was going to be a factory worker and who was going to go off to college. And now we have so many different things. Like we don't need these models of education anymore. And the future of education is so very different. But I think early childhood education has kind of always gotten it right. Like it's always like family style or very kind of like play based, or what is the child interested in? Let's create lessons based off of the way, based off of the way that the child learns, right? That's all like stuff until, yes. That's all based off of the way that children learn, right? We determine, hey, what's he into right now? He's into dinosaurs. Let's make some cool activities with dinosaurs. Let's bake a cake that looks like a dinosaur. Let's do this. They stopped doing that in kindergarten. You know what I mean? Why? Because now we want them to be like worker bees, and we want them to kind of like the kid that can sit still and, not do anything for the next 6 hours is considered a good student and get straight A's and sit there and do that kind of stuff. That's a big part of decolonizing education. So yeah, yes. Oh man. So I mean, and I don't like, I've researched both extensively. I'm not. I want to give the disclaimer that I'm not certified in Montessori. But for most schools that I've looked at, what I've always gotten is that like it is highly structured. And I love the nature part of it. Like I love the natural part of it. But what I've noticed is that a lot of kids get in trouble because you have to do it this way. For example, like the pink staircase has to be a pink staircase, has to go up. And I understand the concept of it. But for example, like I've seen like a Reggio mixed with Montessori, and the pink staircase, they designed like this amazing building with the pink staircase. So the difference between a Montessori teacher is a Montessori teacher, or in the environments that I've seen in Montessori, the teacher that looks at the pink stair, when a child does a pink stair and doesn't do it right, it's wrong. And I don't really care for that. Like we can show the right way and we can encourage the right way, and I can show you, and most children know how to do it the right way. And it's like, but I really want to show you how I did it this way. And they want to, Reggio allows them that. Montessori necessarily may not. And that, from what I've read and heard as well, is in Montessori, they are supposed to allow you to. And she is, even though she shows you the way to do it, you don't have to copy the exact way. Like the philosophy of Montessori was to show me a different way of doing things, but teachers aren't really super trained in it anymore, or don't really know that that's supposed to be. They're very, very structured and very, very strict. Reggio is supposed to be much more inclusive, much more kind of child-centered in what I've noticed, much more play-based, much more art focused, and not just draw me a circle and it has to be this size and then this size and then this size. Like draw me a circle whatever way you want and show me what you've done. Yes, exactly. So Montessori can be very, very, very considered, right? And that's why I don't want to like say like I love the philosophy of Montessori, but the way that most Montessori schools do it, I think, is inaccurate based off of the way that I've read up on Montessori, based on the philosophy, the way that I've read it and the way that I would assume it and the way that I use it in my programming, because we do Montessori, we use the Montessori philosophy. The way that I think a lot of schools have kind of taken it in has been very colonized. Absolutely. And I don't think that that was the way she intended it, just based off of her background. Like, I don't really think that that's what she, right? Yeah. Yes. Yep. Exactly. Yep. Definitely, Danielle. Thank you. So yeah. So Reggio is very, and also Reggio includes technology. And I know technology is like, no. And I'm like, I love technology. I've always been that parent that was like, you can have screen time. That's not but we were always that parent that was like, you can watch TED Ed as long as you want throughout the day. And now my kid is like always telling me stuff, and he's always been a visual based learner. He's always been that kind of learner. But Montessori would have been like, no, like even in Montessori groups I'm in, I kind of have to back away because it's like, we're never going to do screen time. And I get it, that's fine. But I know that that's kind of like the idea of Montessori generally says like no to screens. Right. Yep. Thank you. Yep, Danielle, that's exactly true. And that's why I'm like, the Montessori style itself, I love, but being very careful about like what you're seeing is generally not really what I think her intention was. Right. Yep. Yep, definitely. Thank you. Oh, I know I talked a lot about that. But I'm super passionate about Reggio too. I'm super passionate about like nature-based learning, which kind of comes down to like decolonizing education as well. A lot of people are like, we see a lot of these nature schools that are popping up. I don't know if you guys know Wild Schooling. I love her. So she always is like, she's created a really good resource as well about decolonizing education, and just has taken and we've talked a lot about it, but she talks about like indigenous cultures. And this is really kind of interesting, like attachment parenting, that's always been done among my people. Like that's always been like the norm among my culture. And this, it being kind of colonized in the sense of, oh, this is this new thing that we're going to try. It's like, no, it's like the way that we've always done things, being connected to nature. Another way that we kind of indigenous and, Caribbean and things like that, our culture has always kind of done that. This really idea, American culture is really, and colonized culture has been the one that's been like, step away or create this border between kind of the land and us and kind of control it. And we've always been, let's be a part of it. Let's, you know what I mean? Let's thank it. Let's be grateful for it, for everything that it's bestowed on us. I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, I think that we all kind of have these ideas between like incorporating nature, but recognizing that like indigenous cultures have kind of always done that. It's not really this huge, super new thing for us. Montessori style, we talked about that. Perpetuating stereotypes. So although I'm like, negative stereotypes is really what I'm saying. Don't perpetuate negative stereotypes about people. I think that really kind of like speaks for itself. There's not really much else that I can really say about that. Being anti-racist. So kind of, this is a quote from MLK. I always talk about like MLK because MLK is like always kind of brought up by like white supremacists. It's like, if you just followed MLK, and I'm like, MLK was like he wasn't, you know what I mean? Like he talked a lot about like, he said a riot is a language of the unheard. Like he knew like what was up. And back then we talk about MLK, like MLK, people hated him. Like white people hated him. Like he was not accepted as he, now. But Americans hated him back then, right? Yes, thank you. He was. So one of his quotes that I wanted to bring up is, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." And I know like that's kind of been said a few different times, but he was not about complacency. And that kind of moves me into being an anti-racist. So we talked a little bit about racism in education. So racism in education, what does it look like? It looks like kids in third grade being retained because they couldn't pass a standardized test. It looks at, like we talked about, special education kids. It looks at how A schools get more funding, and A schools are typically in white neighborhoods, right? And then they get more funding and then they have more stuff. And that was the same exact way it was when schools were segregated, and now schools are still segregated. It's kids being expelled from school more being brown or Black and committing the same acts as white children. So it's all of those things. We definitely have to just be aware that these things happen. How we can fix it, we'll talk a little bit about that, but I do definitely want to define this stuff because I think that this is where we've kind of gotten a little bit confused. So a racist is someone who is actively supporting policy. Basically, that is racist. It's like, I'm a racist, I know it, right? And you are just kind of a flat out racist. It doesn't even have to be like I say the N-word or anything like that. It's like, I'm promoting policies and I'm for policies that will affect people in a negative way. Racism, okay? Not racist, right? This is like, okay, I'm not a racist. People love to say like, I'm not a racist. I have Black friends. I'm not a racist. I know some Black people, okay? But you're neutral, okay? You're doing nothing. You don't speak up against racism. You have not said anything. It's just like you live in this little happy bubble that you just can say you're not a racist, right? But you're not doing anything about it. or you're colorblind, which is one of my favorites. And it's like, I get this in a lot of groups and I know like that's, and even 10 years ago, like, or I'm sorry, 20 years ago when I was in college, man, like we talked about like color blindness and like we expected, accepting everybody for who they were and being tolerant was another one. And I think we all kind of have recognized now, like, that's just not enough. Like, obviously we've been talking about that for like 40 years now. It's not working. Being neutral and not fighting against racism or not fighting for inclusion is an issue, okay? So that is basically actively using your voice. That is actively using your body sometimes and going to protest and speaking up against it on Facebook and kind of speaking out against it and doing what you can to be an anti-racist. So it's not enough to be neutral anymore. Now it's much more important to be actively anti-racist. Now, is that like something that you do with a 2-year-old? Yep, Natalia, it's active and constant. We always need to absolutely, always doing it. You're correcting people all the time. Are we doing that with our 2-year-olds? I've had family, I actually still need to respond to a parent now who's like, you ask the kids their pronouns in class in a Black history class. How dare you? Like, what else are you going to be teaching them? And I haven't responded yet because I need to breathe before I can. But the reality is this goes the same way for allies. Like this goes the same way for everyone who kind of deems themselves an anti-racism. You are constantly doing that work to kind of correct people and their thought process. And I'm constantly telling people in our program, somebody asked, like, how do I let people know? Somebody has another micro school. And she's like, how do you let people know? Like, especially these, parents who like have a little bit of money and they're sending them to our school. How do you let them know that you know what I mean? What you believe, what your belief system is. And I think as nannies, as educators, as anyone, I'm very clear on our page, like this is who we are. Like there's no in between. I'm very, very, very clear about that. I used to be very kind of nervous, like, oh man, I'm probably going to lose like clients if I say that I feel this way. But I have 3 Black sons and I don't have that freedom anymore. I don't have the freedom of being kind of not saying that this is what I'm actively trying to make sure that I do. So we do. And I can even show you like, and as an educator, as nannies, I would highly suggest if this is something that there are people that are looking for that. Like I have families that come to us who have, who are transgender and they don't have to worry, as much at least about that feeling of their child being, because it's like, this is just what it is. Like here, as a nanny, you might want to put something in your bio, like I am an anti-racist. Like I don't, like, because it never has to be a question, And then those people who are looking for you will come and find you. And I think that's super, super, super important. And then you can really feel like you can be yourself. Like I now know that I can be who I am and not have to worry about it. But that's kind of it on like what I wanted to talk about regarding, I think, hold on, let me see if there's anything else. I think that's kind of it. Oh, there's some really, really cool principles, and I won't necessarily read them. And they actually are from CARE, but it just talks about all the principles for anti-racist education. So we're doing all of this, affirming the dignity and humanity of all people, embrace historical truth. So please like learn history from a different perspective, because that stuff that we learned when we were 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, elementary school, it missed a lot. I promise you, it missed so much and it's so hard to know, but look, like I promise you, there's so much information out there, right, Danielle? Did you want to say something?
Yes. No, I'm just cheering you on and nodding aggressively because you're so right.
That history, and that's what changes your mindset. Like, wait, what? Like Mount Rushmore, we just found out was like an indigenous, like sacred ground, and like the KKK was helpful in like chiseling it into the 4 presidents or these 4 important kind of founding fathers of our country. Like what that does to, oh wait, really? Like that's when you start to see like what it was all about. We also talk about history. We talk about Black history. We don't talk about Black history from enslavement. And I even ask my kids, I'm like, when do you usually learn Black history from? Like, what was the timeline? And they're always like, enslavement or maybe the civil rights movement. And I'm like, what do you think that does to like Black kids when you say like, this is where your history starts? This is who you were. This is all you were. And I also talk about the term slave. Like we don't really use the term slave anymore. I say we use enslaved person because the people who were kidnapped were doctors, lawyers, queens, kings. Like once you can teach Black students that, we have this amazing history that really goes away from that, really goes so much further back than that to kings and queens, then you have a better view. And then when you teach white students that, they have a better view of Black people, I think, in general too. So that's super important. Thank you, Danielle. Good. I know some classes are like, some teachers, they make sure that they're clear about all this. I love that. So you guys can read through this, but basically being conscious of it, right? Recognize race and confronting racism. So we talked about this. When you see it, do something, say something, and it doesn't have to be you're in trouble or you're bad. Like it has to be like, kids see color. They really do. If you see it and you see that their kind of discussion about it is going in a way that's not, accurate, then correct it. That's our job. We're always teaching, right? And then create just systems. Always be fighting for just systems. Sure. Yeah. Curriculum. There's lots finally popping up with like curriculum, but there's some curriculum that is not as, and I speak to people, like I send emails like all the time, like, I noticed that you have like no Black students and I love your curriculum, but I just can't. Brain Pop is amazing. Like they have kind of come out like specifically saying that they are anti-racist. So they have like conversations for like all the ages about it, and just find those and seek them out. Preschool, we have a preschool curriculum, not to like plug, but I have to. But for example, like we are always embedding inclusive and diverse voices in our stories. We're always talking about feminism in our kind of curriculum. The Black Apple is amazing. She just came out with a preschool curriculum that's secular and decolonizing. There are groups on Facebook that have amazing, just like kind of people like me who are just like creating curriculum because we just missed and didn't see different things. But always be like there's lots of content I think now out there. So if you need to create something for your learners, I think that finding stuff now is much easier. That's good. Q&A time. See? We made it.
You are amazing.
Thank you.
I
so much.
literally have just been nodding nonstop. I'm so just kind of overwhelmed with the amount of excellent information that you just shared with us. Thank you so much. I really, I knew that you had so much to teach us. And I know that, the things that you shared with us today are really literally priceless. And I'm so grateful for your time, because I think, the world that a lot of us are in, working with children and providing care for children, we encounter so many different sort of unjust systems from beginning to end. And having these tools to sort of start looking at how we can really kind of interrogate the inclusiveness of these aspects of education, it excites me to think about the future that we're building together for these children, for the kids that we're caring for, because I just am so excited for a time when all children will be treated with equity, where they will be able to approach history, like you mentioned, with a real, true understanding of the origin of their ancestors and the incredible stories that hold all of this power. And I just really appreciate the way that you've touched on so many different aspects of diversity and the ways that each of us can really take action in being actively anti-racist and not standing on the sidelines, but kind of putting ourselves between, racism and children and saying, no, we're going to figure this out. We're going to actively interrogate what's going on and fix this. And I just am so appreciative of you. I really can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, I kind of have such a fun time talking about this stuff. So like, thank you so much for giving me the time and the space. Like I said, I'm super passionate about it. So thank you.
Well, you are amazing. So a couple of notes from the chat. Natalia, I want to thank you for being so interactive, you guys. I really appreciate how everyone's been active in the chat. So one thing that Natalia said that I really just honestly could make me cry: radical hope is one of the more important praxis for me in decolonizing. And I think that is such a really beautiful way to frame that. Radical hope, really knowing that the future is bright. We are a part of developing the groundwork and laying that out by really educating people with this true reality. And I love that idea. Radical hope is just incredible. So, so Danielle also said, we may not have built the foundation of this house, but we have inherited it with all its stress, fractures, and mold. So now we are the ones that need to take care of it and fix it. #radical hope. I
That's
love that.
hot. I do
Yeah.
too.
Okay, so one last really quick thing. So Gentry
True.
popped into the chat and said, are there any books that you would recommend for my 5 and 3-year-old kids? They love reading. I love teaching them through the
Ooh.
books.
Like,
Now, I
there's a
gotta tell you,
few.
y'all gotta check her out on Instagram because honestly, there's so many resources
That
available on
is.
kindacademy.org. So do check them
Thank
out.
you. Oh man, I should really put together a book list as I get that all the time. But just like off the top of my head, I just moved. So I have like, I want to like pull stuff out and show you like the beauty. There's one book and I keep like pushing her and she's like, and like literally she's like, not on, like you can't buy it online or anything. You literally have to look her up. If anything, if you want, you can friend me and I can like send you a link. Her name is Melissa. And I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her last name. But she's created this book called, astronomers. Oh man, it's basically early astronomers, like people like Black people were astronomers. Like there's like
Yeah,
this whole idea, like we always learn about these Europeans who were astronomers. It's like Black people, indigenous people, they were looking at the sky too, y'all. Like,
right.
so she wrote this amazing, beautiful, beautiful illustrated, like my kid, like my kids picked it up and just like, wow, like it just feels so good and looks so good. So that's a really good book. Astronomers, early astronomers, or the earliest astronomers, the first astronomers is the name of the book. But it's not like on Amazon or anything. So you look it up, you're not going to get it. It's on, her name is Melissa and her last name, I want to say is Hawaiian. So I don't want to butcher her last name. But amazing, amazing, amazing. Timelines of Black History is another amazing book. A is for activists, if we're talking about the little ones, like that whole range. Anti-Racist Baby, of course, by Kendi is another one. Just kind of getting those things in there. I always like include Pride books, like we always do during June, and even all just throughout the year. Like we always on our shelf have like Pride books, books about people with different families and different things like that. All Are Welcome is another really cool one. There's another really good one called No Elephants Allowed, I think is what it's called. Something like that, where like the kid like goes with this elephant and they want to like get into this club and they don't let them in, and they like talked about, and you could just really talk about diversity with that book and just inclusion and like, hey, like, you know, how they could have made it accessible. I can go on and on, like all the
Well,
cool
that's
books.
awesome.
Yeah, man, definitely.
You
But
have
yeah,
like the best recommendations. Well,
thank
we will
you.
definitely check this out. So I'm going to do a blog post that kind of wraps up some of these resources.
Thank
And
you.
Iman, if you don't mind sending me, just emailing me the slides, I can pop some of them in there for resources. And everyone, if you want to join
Sure.
our Summit Sessions Facebook group, you'll be able to watch the recording and also recordings of any other sessions in the past. But Iman, I just want to thank you again for your
You're
time and for just the emotional
welcome.
labor of creating this and sharing with us. And we are just so incredibly lucky to have your time. And I just want to thank you again.
You are so very welcome. I put it in the chat for you, Danielle. You can share it out however you prefer to.
Okay,
But
cool.
please let me know if you need or have any other questions. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I want to thank you for joining us for
You're
Summit Session number
welcome.
18. Mark your calendars, guys. Our next Summit Session is going to be in November. We're going to be hearing from Danny Rosenthal, founder of Nanny ABCs. And I just want to encourage you again, please check out kindacademy.org and Kind Academy on Instagram and Facebook to learn more about the incredible work that Iman is doing. The website is kindacademy.org, and I would strongly encourage you to also check out their fabulous homeschool kits. They are a really inclusive and eye-opening and engaging educational subscription box, and I think that you would really love them. So
Thank
thank you all again for
you.
your
You're
time.
welcome, everyone. Thank you so much again. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye,
Thanks for
all. Thank
having
you so
me.
much.
Bye.